TNTRadio.live, lighting the fuse for freedom. Today's News Talk, TNT Radio. Bruce Torres on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
With me this hour is Bart Sibrel, whose site is Sibrel.com, Sibrel.com. He is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, and investigative journalist who has commented about the moon landing fraud and discussed his films, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and Astronauts Gone Wild on NBC, Fox, CNN, HBO, Geraldo, The Daily Show, The Abrams Report, Coast to Coast, and now TNT Radio. In his memoir, Moon Man, Bart reveals the military base where the first staged moon landing was filmed and names 15 United States government scientists and officials who were in attendance for the first moon landing falsification. And in his book, Moon Man, he recounts many other things, including the attempts to silence him. Thank you very much for joining me today, Bart. How are you?
I'm doing good, Bruce. How about yourself? How's it down under?
Well, I'm in New York City. I'm on Staten Island. Headquarters is down under.
Are you telling me what I see on TV isn't true?
Well, who should know that better than you, Bart?
Yeah, really. Oh my.
Things are great out here. Allow me to read a little more of your bio. Bart has been producing television programs, documentaries, music videos, TV commercials, and stage plays for over 40 years, starting at the age of 18, hosting his own television talk show. Bart has owned 5 video production companies, has been employed by 2 of the 3 major networks, worked as a television news reporter, and produced videos shown on ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, TLC, USA, and BET. But wait, there's more. Sibrel has also appeared as a seasoned actor on the stage and screen over 500 times. Articles featuring his films have been published in Time Magazine, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and USA Today. His awards from the American Motion Picture Society include Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Top 10 Director. Now, if that weren't exciting enough, I suppose this is what I like to ask at the top, Bart. What is top of mind? Or tell me the story of how you got interested in confirming whether or not the moon landings were true. What door shall we open to begin this conversation?
Okay, so I can write on the fly, so I need to know how much time to tell that story I have. How long is this interview, Bruce?
1 hour.
Oh, an hour.
With a couple of breaks
for me to work with there. Well,
in defense, I've got to tell my team who's listening. I've informed you that over the emails. If I don't throw that in, Bart, they're going to think, how is that a surprise to any of Bruce's guests? But anyway, I'm listening.
So, I grew up like everybody believing the moon missions are real, and even more so. I mean, I don't know how many people out there had a shrine in their house, and about the moon landing fraud, a shrine, because my father was in the Air Force, and we found out that the faking of the moon landing was filmed at an Air Force base. And I was 4 years old, asleep in bed past my bedtime. But my father was a high-ranking officer. He got this VIP package of about 20 9x12 color prints of Apollo 11, of them allegedly on the moon. He gave it to me. It was my most treasured possession. And, in the military, we moved around about every 2 years. So every new bedroom, right there on the wall, all 20 of the pictures, and I saw them. You got to understand this. Every day, for 10 years in a row, from age 4 to 14, that's 3,650 times minimum, and I probably saw them 4 times a day. So we're talking about, I've seen these pictures like 10, 12,000 times, believing that they were on the moon and thinking it's the most glorious thing in the world. So to go from that to knowing for certain, and then more than certain, that sadly, they really did fake it. I mean, that's the strangest thing. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. And I lay out in the book 4 incontrovertible proofs that each individually would prove it in a court of law, and we have 4 times the evidence. And if it weren't for people's emotional attachment to the glorious moon landing, they would see the truth for what it was. So by the age I was 14 and saw them all those thousands of times, I'm watching this TV show. And, Oprah started, and one of her first guests on there was a gentleman by the name of William Casey. He worked for NASA during the Apollo program for 6 years. His security clearance was only one step below von Braun. And believe it or not, his specialty wasn't rocket design, it was English, because von Braun's native language was not English. And so he was sending these memos to the Pentagon, and then the Pentagon people, the generals, their forte is war, not grammar. So he would polish up their grammar and make sure the translation was correct, and therefore he would read classified information, including a memo from von Braun to the Pentagon in the mid-60s warning them this is not going to happen on schedule. And if you try, there's a 99.99% chance you're going to kill the crew on national TV. So they decided, like a good poker player, to bluff. I'm trying to explain to my wife how to play poker, and I'm telling her, you can win with the worst hand in the world. And you just act like you got the best, and you win. And that's what they did. And people don't understand how easy it was to fake. There's no independent press coverage. I mean, how many witnesses are there to World War II? 4 billion, right? There's 0 eyewitnesses to this except 3 former military people sworn to secrecy and no independent press coverage. It's not like NBC is there to verify it. Whatever picture Nixon gives us, whatever TV transmission Nixon gives us, we assume that that is on the moon. And so I see this guy saying this, and I'm a 14-year-old, fortunately an open-minded 14-year-old. And so I'm thinking, never thought of that. So I go back to my bedroom wall, and the first thing I noticed, now they've color corrected the picture since then, but you'll notice from the Chinese probes, which are real, the soil of the moon is a caramel brown. It only looks grayish from the sunlight. So in the original pictures, if you can get them from eBay or a library book, the ground is caramel brown, and then the background is very gray blue. They don't match. Now they match. Now the ground is grayish blue to match the background. So you could see a line going left to right horizontally where the real dirt ends and the fake background begins. I'm like, never noticed that before. My eyes were wide shut. Then go forward another 10 years. I'm 24. I'd become a filmmaker. And the guy who produced the show I saw as a teenager is sitting beside me. I'm editing a film for him. And I'm like, who was that guy on your show who said we didn't go to the moon? And he puts me in touch with him. And he says, Bill Casey, you're a filmmaker. Make a film about how we didn't go to the moon. I'm like, well, let me think about this. So I literally stopped working for 6 months. I pay myself a salary out of savings to do nothing but research. And if you go to Sibrel.com, there's a 3-minute video on the home page, and you'll see shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart. Go outside on a cloudless day in a parking lot, or look at 2 trees, 2 people, 2 telephone poles. They're always parallel. It's impossible for shadows to intersect at 90 degrees in sunlight. And there they are. An astronaut, a rock, 5 feet apart. I mean, you can prove it in a court of law from one picture. I'm like, that's weird.
Proving 2 light sources, not the one moon.
Yeah, or one is really close. Because if the light source is really close, then it's going to throw off the angle if you're to the left of the light or right of the light. So I'm like, that's weird. Then 2 of the 3 guys on the first mission never talked about it. 2 of the 3 don't give interviews. That's weird. And then the administrator of NASA, before he's to put this feather in his cap, he resigns. They won't have anything to do with it. And then the Soviets launched the first satellite, the first animal, the first man, the first woman, the first crew of 3, the first spacewalk. They did everything first. For every 10 hours we spent in space, they spent 50 hours. And then they never went to the moon. And so, and then we find out.
I just rewatched a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. At that time, the best the Soviets did, about a month before the first Apollo, they wanted to send an unmanned retrieve rocks and bring it back, but it crashed. So the Soviets, so far ahead of us, couldn't even successfully do that. I remember that right?
Well, they can't do it today. I mean, Israel crashes a probe into the moon that they intend to land, and they say it's a completely successful mission. Elon Musk launches a rocket, it blows up right off the launch pad, and they said it was successful because it left the tower. That's like saying the Titanic was successful because it left the dock. No, I mean they're calling the rocket blowing up successful when it wasn't intended to blow up. I mean, what are they twisting my mind or their own, or what's going on here? And then the second proof is simply logic. Today, with 54-year better rocket and computer technology, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is only 1,000th the distance to the moon. So what they're really claiming is 54 years ago, on the first attempt, ahead of schedule, when all of NASA's computers contained 1/1,000th the computing power of a cell phone, they sent astronauts 1,000 times farther than they can send them today with 54 years better technology. So what they're claiming is that for the first time in the history of the world, technology was greater, 1,000 times greater, in the past than in the future. But that's scientifically and historically impossible. So that's proof. And then we uncovered, you got to understand, I got $1 million budget given to me by an anonymous rocket designer, builder, who builds rockets for NASA, who knows they were fake, who said, this is wrong. We need to expose this. And so then we discover classified footage of them faking part of the moon mission right in front of your eyes. They're using a 1-foot model of the Earth to pretend it's in outer space. The lights come up, and it's a 1-foot model, and it's dated 2 days into the flight. All the astronauts are identified on camera, and there's a third track of audio of the CIA prompting them to fake a 4-second radio delay. That's the third proof. And then the fourth proof is Cyrus Eugene Akers, a man who was security chief at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. As he's dying, fearing the judgment of God, he says, I'm a murderer. The military police come in and say, who did you murder? He says, I murdered a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. They say, well, why did you do that? He said, well, we eyewitnessed the filming of the first fake moon landing, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. We were sworn to secrecy. We were told if we told anybody, we would die. My friend was going to tell a reporter. I'm the chief of security. I executed him to keep it a secret. That's what he said. And then he stood beside President Johnson, who this is why he didn't run for re-election. Who knew they would get away with it? What if they got caught? Didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so President Johnson gave the chief of security, who gave it to me, he said, these 15 people are allowed in to observe and no one else. The guy kept it as a private souvenir, and now I got it. I published it in the book.
Bart Sibrel is with me talking about, I'm going to say, one of my favorite movies that he made. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. And we're then going to get into everything since and all it implies for the state of the nation today.
TNT.
This is World Stage, and Bart Sibrel, you are with me, and you are stone cold, one of the bravest men that I know, because I've studied you for years, and I was glad to finally connect with you and invite you on to my show. And you just gave a great summary of the 4 major proofs that the moon landings were faked. I would ask us now to go through them again just a little bit more slowly and maybe interact and discuss, the fullness of it, because if we could do that for the next 5 or 10 minutes with this goal in mind, inspiring people to go to your site, Sibrel.com, Sibrel, and start clicking and seeing, because to people hearing this for the first time, it just might be overwhelming, but it's that exciting. It's that important. So let's go through those 4 again, and I'll interject with you what I remember from just seeing again. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which people can find and watch for free through your site, Sibrel.com, on your YouTube channel. What are those 4 major proofs again?
On the homepage, I believe, is a video called The Moon Landing Fraud in 3 Minutes. And the only one that's not in there is the deathbed confession. The first one is photographic proof. And that's in the 3-minute video, The Moon Landing Fraud in 3 Minutes. It's shadows intersecting. So basically in sunlight, shadows are always parallel. And so just go out at high noon on a cloudless day, look at two trees, two telephone poles, or two people standing, no matter where they are or where the trees are, whatever time of day, it doesn't matter. The sun is a million times bigger than the earth. It's going to throw shadows in the same direction on the continent. And this moon picture I show, they're intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart. That is an electrical light. That cannot happen in sunlight, which means an electrical light, which means they're not on the moon. End of story.
And in that example, it proves two different light sources, right?
Or one light is close, because if you're to the left of the light, it's going to throw the shadow in one direction. And if another person is on the right-hand side of the light, it's going to throw a shadow in another direction, or two. Either one is light. Yeah.
What was that second proof?
The second proof is classified footage we uncovered that I casing believe someone sent me. And you pop it in, and the tape says, "Do not show to the public." Now, all the official footage is pre-edited. This is an hour of a single special effects shot. And then it's time-stamped by NASA's computer, and I'm sure they know how to tell time, 2 days into the flight. So it's not like they did this before they left. And they were on the rocket. They just never left Earth orbit. And what a surprise. 54 years later, they still cannot leave Earth orbit. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon in the latest mission. Funny,
let me interject just to set up the need for staying within a few hundred miles of Earth orbit. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. Your movie is a beautiful experience. I want to talk about the quality of your filmmaking for a minute, if I could. It's a beautiful experience because all the powers at your command, my friend, the pacing, the music, the tone of voice of the narrator, but from the beginning, and it's about 46 minutes. All you've described right now is on a silver platter to people in 46 minutes. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. And in the movie, what we're talking about, the classified footage that you and no one else was ever supposed to see, is at the end of the movie. You set up first beautifully a teaching about Van Allen radiation belts. Talk about those for a minute, please.
Yeah, I didn't know about them. And what it is, most people don't know about them, but every manned mission, except going to the moon, is well below this huge field of radiation that's above the Earth and surrounds the Earth. It's called the Van Allen radiation belt, named after the guy who discovered it. It doesn't start until about 1,000 miles up, and most people orbit 750 miles below that, at 250 miles where the space station is. So the radiation begins at 1,000 miles, and it's up to 30,000 miles thick. So they'd be in it, even at the speed they were going, an hour and a half to the moon and an hour and a half coming back. And the most intense radiation that is at least 100 times greater than a lethal dose. 100 times greater than a lethal dose. And so by them faking being halfway to the moon, it means they can't go halfway. They cannot leave Earth orbit. That's the limitation.
Because the protection, the lead or anything else to protect a space capsule with humans would be so monstrously heavy. Humans can't get that off the Earth yet.
That's right. Von Braun said so. And in one of the supplemental links, the book is interactive with 17 video links. I basically write a chapter and I say, look, if you want to understand the next chapter, go to Sibrel.com. Click on the top left button, Moonman Videos. All those links you can watch for free. And one of them is about NASA's own engineer, Kelly Smith, who's talking about the radiation belts. And he says, word for word, the technology necessary for an astronaut to go through them to the moon and back and survive has yet to be invented. He says
when
it himself.
When did he say that? When did he say that?
In 2014.
Thank you.
And then so I call up NASA. I'm a journalist. Can I talk to this guy? And they're like, well, he put his foot in his mouth, so we don't let him talk to the media anymore. And then I'm like, okay, well, you sent an unmanned probe into the middle of the radiation with 2 Geiger counters and then right back. So the whole point was to measure the radiation, which they would already know what it was if they really went to the moon and back 6 times. And so they come back with the information. I say, great. This is a non-military, civilian-funded taxpayer project. May I please have the radiation readings that I pay for. And they say, well, that's a military secret. And I'm like, okay, let me make sure I understand this. When you send a probe to the sun to find out the temperature of the temperature of the sun is not a military secret. And when you send a probe to Jupiter to find out how much helium is in the atmosphere, the amount of helium isn't a military secret. So why would this part of nature, the amount of radiation surrounding the Earth, why is a part of nature a secret? Because if they told you, it would reveal it's impossible to go to the moon, which is what the guy said before they sent the radiation detectors into it.
Right. And in your movie, you say, or the narrator says, we learn that the Apollo craft had a very minuscule, thin layer of aluminum.
Yeah, 1/8 of an inch of aluminum, which is less than you receive for a dental X-ray, which lasts 1/24th of a second. And this is 1.5 hours of nonstop.
Of 100 times worse than a lethal dose. Yeah.
That's right.
That's the context, I think, of appreciating a major element of that classified footage. Now, you started to set it up that footage was of the 3 astronauts of Apollo 11, Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin, in their capsule. Tell me what it shows.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's for free at Sibrel.com in the movie on the homepage. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. But if you can imagine a TV screen that's mostly black with a little blue ball Earth in it. They're supposed to be, they claim, they're halfway to the moon. They say the lens of the camera's right up at the window, which it would have to be to shoot the little Earth far away. Well, the lights come up in the unedited version. The camera's really at the back of the spacecraft. They turned out all the lights, and it's a circular window that they have part of the Earth in Earth orbit outside of it. But with the lights off, it looks like the Earth floating in space. It's very clever. Had I only gotten the portion that they broadcast, I doubt if I would have figured it out. And
right,
then
because when they turn on the lights inside the capsule, you can see that the camera is at the far end of the capsule. The window is farther away at the end of the capsule, and it's filled with the bright blue and clouds of the Earth because they're only a couple hundred miles above.
Yeah, they've used a section of the Earth outside and the circular window to make it look like the circular Earth with the black of space around it, which are really the darkened walls of the spacecraft with the lights off. And then there's a third track of audio. You hear NASA say, hey, the picture looks great. Then there's 4 seconds of dead air. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you hear a third track of audio. It's not NASA. It's not the astronauts say, talk. You see, they're supposed to be halfway to the moon, and with light speed and through the computers, they calculated 2 seconds for the radio signal to get to them, 2 seconds to come back. So if they answer right away, it gives away the fact that they're still in Earth orbit when they're supposed to be halfway to the moon. So they said, don't answer the question right away. We're going to count off 4 seconds on a stopwatch. When you hear us in your earpiece say talk, 4 seconds have gone by, then answer the question to create this fake radio delay. We have that on the tape too. And let me add this. When it dawned on me, Bruce, when the lights come up and I hear talk and I'm thinking, well, they're definitely faking being halfway to the moon, which means they can't go halfway, which means they didn't go. I just wept quietly. I'm like, oh my gosh. They really did fake the moon landing. How sad is that? Not just for the U.S., really for mankind. This is how far we have fallen. And everybody claims they want to bring the deep state down. But I did Glenn Beck's show, and he's kissing the feet of an Apollo astronaut who's accessory to multiple homicides and treating the guy like a saint. People don't understand. Even though the moon landing fraud killed fewer people than 9/11 and the Kennedy assassination list, Kennedy's still dead, and those 3,000 people are still dead. It's just a matter of who did it and why. This is different. This is an entire fabrication. This is a positive lie. This is candy. I'm trying to take candy away and give them manure instead. And an NBC news director saw this footage. He says it proves they didn't go to the moon, but I won't broadcast it. It'll cause a civil war. Another NBC news director overrode them and said, we're going to broadcast this nationwide and break this story. They get a threatening call from the federal government. They back down because they saw that this will bring down the deep state more than any other, even though it killed fewer people because they put it on coins, they put it on stamps, they gave them medals of honor. It's burned in people's hearts, and if they find out, they will be outraged.
Talk to who was killed.
Well, Cyrus Eugene Akers killed one person, and then we know that one of the Apollo astronauts, James Irwin, was killed because when after he faked the moon landing, he became a born-again Christian. He telephoned Bill Casey and said, "We got to talk about your book. We didn't go to the moon. I have something important to say." He says, "I'm concerned for my security. Call me at this number 3 days from now." On that day, he had a fatal heart attack. So he was killed. And then we have 4 backup crews of Apollo astronauts who had accidental deaths within a 24-month period. So out of 24 Apollo astronauts, 4 of them had accidents not related to space travel within a 24-month period. And then we have the Apollo 1 fire. January 27th, 1967, I interviewed the man's widow for 4 hours. His son, who's a 747 pilot, for 3 hours. They asked me not to put this information in the film. I could release it after her death. I put it in the book. She told me, the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon came home from work on January 26, 1967, and said this: "Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today. I wonder why."
Is that Virgil Gus Grissom?
That's right. He says, "I've never seen the CIA here. Why did they show up today? They're inspecting the equipment." The next day, he's dead from faulty equipment because a couple of days before that, he knew this was a piece of junk without permission. He invited a bunch of reporters to the top of the rocket, and he took a lemon the size of a grapefruit and hung it, and he said, "This thing is a piece of junk." That infuriated the Pentagon, and they took care of him a few days later. And since then, all the astronauts said, "Yes, sir, we'll do what you say." So they murdered people. The Declaration of Independence precedes the Constitution. When any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Life. They're not only taking a third of our income to fake moon landings when they promise they're going, they're using that to pay the salaries and the equipment of CIA agents to murder our brethren who are trying to expose their crimes. They're murdering our own friends with the money that we give them. They're destructive to life. Right there.
Your movie, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, examines how the mindset of the 1960s Cold War makes it so logical that they would do this bluff when they discovered in the mid or whenever in the 1960s when they realized, oh, we're definitely not going to make the end of the deadline goal that Kennedy put out there. And your movie talks about the money and how the budget, how huge it was for its time, and how the need to bluff this in the eyes of the world, to be able to pound chests and bully and intimidate the Soviet Union. But even more so, it's probably that money that could be absconded and diffused out to the various major contractors, because if it didn't have to be invested in the actual technology that could make a moon landing and return possible, boy, that's a big slush fund that can be diverted into all kinds of juicy things and also into all kinds of greedy hands.
Well, we're talking about equivalent now of $200 billion. And the first military source who told me this was fake, and I didn't believe him, let me just be honest, he said it's all about the money. And so if they only did Earth orbit, which they had already done, then they only spent 25% of the $200 billion, right? Yeah. And then get this, they destroyed all the equipment, all the blueprints, all the original videotapes. Now, imagine Bill Gates spending $200 billion to build the first supercomputer. And when he's done, it works fabulous. And then he throws the equipment, the schematics, all the originals to rebuild it into the furnace and burns it up. Would anybody do that? Not in a million years.
I want to dig into Moon Man. I want to get into the backstory. I want you to share with me the beginning, middle, and end of your personal journey wrestling with this story, ferreting out the truth, and the unbelievable courage. You took a fist to the face, at least the one on film. With me is Bart Sibrel, the creator of a very important movie called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon.
Bruce Torres on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Bart Sibrel, creator of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, author of Moon Man. What is the subtitle of Moon Man? Something about filmmaker on the CIA's hit list?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Like I said, when was the first time that NASA actually told somebody, I used to know, hey, what happened to all the records or the films or even the technology, even the plans for the technology? Oops, we lost it or it got destroyed. Tell me everything you know about that, please.
Well, according to Don Pettit, who's a national, NASA astronaut, and this is one of the clips at Sibrel.com, he says out of his own mouth that NASA intentionally destroyed all the technology that they used to go to the moon, all the blueprints, all the diagrams, all the engineers. And like I said, they maybe should have at least considered doing that with the atomic bomb, but only 10 years later, atomic bombs were 1,000 times more powerful. So if we could go to the moon on the first attempt, 10 years later, we'd be on Mars, and now we'd be in another solar system, and there'd be bases all over the moon. And then the videotape.
Do you recall when Don Pettit may have made that claim?
I think that was 2018, and that's one of the clips you can see for free at Sibrel.com. And then Ron Howard, I guess, not that long ago, wanted to make an IMAX movie and wanted to glorify the moon landings, on like 100 feet by 120 feet. His grandfather warned him, don't do it. The moon landings are fake, and he doesn't listen to the guy, right? And he was brainwashed with Apollo toys and rockets like I was. And so he's like, well, give me the originals because we're going to, and they only broadcast fourth generation. Do you understand? The networks were begging for a live feed. They said, no, we're going to take the feed. We're going to put it on a projection TV of 1969 quality. You're going to film that with the TV camera. That's going to go to a monitor, and then you're going to film the monitor. They didn't want clear images. So they say to Ron Howard, give us a few days. And then within those days, they destroyed or misplaced about 1 ton of videotapes. And he had to go to Blockbuster Video to get NASA footage because he reduces it to like 5% of the IMAX screen because the quality is so low. You can see the VHS tracking line at the bottom. There's very little footage of it. They intentionally destroyed it. Now, if you went to the moon, you would never, ever, ever, ever destroy a $200 billion investment. However, if you perpetrated a fraud, that's exactly what you would do. So that's a proof right there.
Yeah. It's comprehensive, and folks can definitely find that on so much that you've got at your site and your movie. And I want to talk about, please, like I said, your personal journey recounted in your book Moon Man, which is great. I loved it. But if you don't mind, what the personal human toll this has taken on you, please.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff, I never said a single time in an interview, not once in 20 years. But since the book came out and it's kind of my final statement officially, I thought, well, I might as well just tell the story. So when I popped in the tape, found in the secret footage, after I finished crying out of just, sadness for mankind that we have stooped this low, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have proof we didn't go to the moon in my house. I've got a toddler son and a blind roommate. What have I gotten myself into? And I go to church, and they're like, you need to drive like a bat out of hell. And this is Wednesday night, and I'm like the last person leaving of 300 cars. We stopped church at 8:30. I'm still there at 10, getting advice from the elders. And they're like, drive like a bat out of hell. To copy of the tape, give it to CNN. You bit off more than you can chew. And I'm like, I don't want to give up the scoop of the century, but they're right. So as I'm leaving church, this car that was backed into a business that had been closed for hours pulls out immediately after I go by. And I'm like, oh, they were waiting for me. So I stop in the middle of the road, and I say, I'm not going anywhere. I got all night. And I see the guy stop, and a minute goes by too. I'm like, I got all night. I'm not going to go anywhere until this guy's in front of me. He finally gives it up. He passes me, gets on, and I follow him. Know your enemy. I pull up alongside of him on the, freeway, 2 lanes one way, 2 lanes the other, medium in the middle. And I say, I want to see who this guy is. I've never seen this in a single person my whole life until that moment. But he had that look of a great white shark grabbing the meat, off the side of the boat. He doesn't care whether it's your grandmother, your daughter, your wife. It's just meat, no soul, no one at home. That's how this guy looked. Like he would kill me and go home and have fried chicken dinner, not think about it. And as soon as we connected eyes, everything on my car shut off. Like the engine, the electricity, I had to coast. I'm on foot running from him and 2 other of his friends he meets up with, literally being chased. A cab pulls over, gives me a ride. I get another cab. I hire them to go to CNN. When I'm at CNN, I'm stopped by, I guess, police officers on the take preventing me from going in. I make my way to the back alley and I'm surrounded by like 8 police with a white van, unmarked cars. And they put me in handcuffs. They take these big Betacam tapes for broadcast. And I hear them say, well, where's the thing? Well, I thought he had the thing. No, he's got the thing. I'm like, what is the thing? They're all wearing rubber gloves. And the thing is like this, kind of like a hospital bracelet, when you check in. And within a half a minute where my veins are, you see, where they're handling it with gloves, remember, I feel like I'm on LSD to the point where I'm throwing up. Now, a lawyer comes out an alleyway and he starts taking notes. Look, I'm a journalist. I'm being illegally. Had he not been there, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. And then they gave me truth serum. And I tell them everything they want to know. I'm in La La Land. I think they're the good guys. I end up escaping their custody, make my way back to Nashville, and then I say, I got him. I got truth serum in me. So I pee in a cup. I give it to a friend to put in a lab in his name, thinking I can outwit the CIA. And when I check on the results, he says, well, there was a problem at the lab. And I'm like, what problem? He says, well, they had a break-in over the weekend. And I'm like, well, so what? He said, well, funny thing, the only thing stolen was your urine sample. And then, it just gets worse from there, if you can imagine. And then when I make the follow-up film, Astronauts Gone Wild, where I track down the astronauts and either ask them to swear on the Bible or I show them the classified footage. So I'm in Edgar Mitchell's house, the peace guru, right? Who, side note, says UFOs are real, just as real as the moon landing. We'll talk about that in another episode. And so I show him the footage of them faking it. He says, where did you get this? He turns beet red, literally kicks me from behind. This startles my cameraman, startles me. We get out of there and we forget that we left the high quality wireless microphone on him. And my camera guy's so startled, he forgets to hit stop record. So as the camera's in the back seat of the rental car with the door closed, and he's in his house with the doors closed, we're recording his private conversations on the videotape in the car. And the film secretary, months later, who's doing a transcript, calls me up frantic. Bart, you know what they're talking about? Before you U-turn to get your mic back? I'm like, I don't know what. She says they're talking about calling the CIA to have you assassinated. I'm like, that's funny. She says, no, Bart. They're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. I'm like, that's really funny. She says, Bart, you're not listening. They're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. And sure enough, they are. It's in the film. Do you want to call the CIA and have him whacked? Now, first of all, if this is a civilian project, why does an Apollo astronaut have the CIA in his Rolodex? Secondly, if I'm some silly person who thinks the moon landings were shot on Earth in a TV studio, why would the CIA care? You see? And so I talk about all these espionage adventures that I went through, including being drugged, kidnapped, and followed, and just, crazy, crazy things. And I also, and maybe I shouldn't have shared this, but it's too late, I meet a couple of good guys in the government, face to face, okay, who got my back, who they literally sent in, as best as I can tell, they were Marine intelligence officers to protect me. Literally.
Well, here's a chance to
I don't know what that means, except there's a civil war under the radar in the government going on.
Well, it reminds me of a couple things. Your great Christian faith that you attest to exuberantly and beautifully and mercifully, and also how in these dark times, which I talk to everybody I can on this show and elsewhere about what's going on and how bad it is and how bleak it is. And about 1/5 of the time, 1/4 of the time, somebody remembers. And unfortunately, it's not me. Hey, for this amount of darkness or evil, everything being kind of balanced or equal in nature, there's got to be at least as much good. And for a man like you of faith and mine, which is a little different faith, but I'm going to claim the same point here. There's an overwhelming and much more good in the world. So I hope that wasn't too rambling, but I know I made a heartfelt
No,
point.
that's
at
a
least.
big part of it. I had divine intervention, and the film, as you know, opens up with scripture. The thing about this that I wanted to make sure we squeeze in the time we have left, if I may,
This is good.
Bobby Kennedy's own nephew, okay, he has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone. He says that his uncle was killed by the CIA. So guess who killed him? The CIA. And then Robert McNamara, okay, defense secretary during the Vietnam War, when all the Americans were against it, who said we need a Pearl Harbor type of thing. He says we staged the Gulf of Tonkin. Never happened. That led to the death of 3 million people, 58,220 Americans. My point is, if they're willing to kill their own president, to kill 58,220 of their own soldiers, I don't think they have a problem with faking an image of the moon on television. And let me conclude with, just a few weeks ago, there was a big AI conference where the top AI people in the world were given limited 3-day access to the super AI, well above AI, called the neural network. And one team at that conference fed it pictures of the Chinese probes of the surface of the moon through its deep fake protocol that can decide whether this video of Biden is real or not. It's never been wrong. It says the pictures from China, 100% real. They feed them in pictures from the Apollo, 100% fake. Just came out. They're trying to suppress it. It's not on RT, so don't think that's an anti-deep state. It's not on Fox. That's not an anti-deep state. Don't believe that, you see? And this is breaking news. Either their $10 billion 10-year investment, they're inept and it's a piece of junk, or they didn't go to the moon, right? And so they didn't go to the moon. And AI says so. And they're trying to suppress that right now. That's the latest development.
Yeah, and I've seen that through your platforms. So yeah, wherever anyone looks at or tries to fact check or vet your work, there is a great corroboration that's coming from all. In our final 4 or 5 minutes, Bart, what would you tell me? What would you emphasize? What's the most urgent thing? What's the most profound implication of what you have found about the staged moon landings? What have repeat or reiterate, or what haven't maybe we covered?
Thank you. I mean, I've never heard anyone present it that way, so thank you, Bruce. And here it is. The number one tool, trust me on this, I didn't believe it at first. The NBC news director told me this 20 years ago. I disagreed. 6 weeks ago, I agreed with him. The number one tool to bring down the deep state is exposing the moon landing fraud. Even though JFK 9/11 killed more people, this is burned in people's hearts. They knelt and they prayed for them. They waved their flag. And it's a lie. It's a positive lie. If the public finds out that that was a fraud, that will bring down the deep state more than who shot JFK, more than who did 9/11. And it's the one topic the top 2 podcasters are afraid to talk about. The one tool that will bring down the deep state the most. You see that? Why is that? This is what will bring the deep state down. It will infuriate the public. We prayed for them. How can this most outrageous thing, and it's not just a matter of changing who did it and why. This was complete fabrication, and it was unnecessary. $200 billion, and they murdered people to cover it up. And it's a complete fabrication. That's what will bring the deep state down. I think the AI may already do that. Now, when you pull your finger out of the dike, that doesn't happen right away. It gets a little bigger and a little bigger. Maybe 2 years from now, it'll come down. But that's the key. If you really want to bring the deep state down, the moon landing fraud is the key. That's going to outrage the public more than anybody else. And lastly, it's so profound. You don't get it. The faking of the moon landing is so much more profound than if they had actually gone. It's so much more profound historically that the greatest event in human history was a complete fabrication by the world's leading country, and it never happened. And that's the state of mankind. That's how far we have fallen. And all the other world governments follow their lead in corruption. So we have to expose this, or the world will never, ever get better. You cannot have a great awakening if you know everything else, but still believe this lie.
Yeah, there's a profound hearing you, discussing it with you has been profound. Watching your movie, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, like I said earlier, is a beautiful and profound thing. Here's the point. What you just said, it comes down to integrity. If we don't have the personal integrity to look for and then speak up for the truth, we can't be surprised that our government is a clown act. And it's more and more obviously a clown act with every one of today's cascading stories. But you're right. In many ways, this is really at the heart and soul of deception. And as the biggest deception, if when light can be shown on this, and you know what I know you know this, and I'm going to claim it for you and for me, the truth comes out. The truth comes out. And it may not be in our lifetime, but rest assured it will. And you've played a huge part as a fulcrum, as a lever, as Archimedes said, to pry it out, Bart, and it will stand for all time. And our last really handful of seconds, we're Sibrel.com. How should people follow you?
Yeah, S as in Sam, I-B as in boy, REL.com. You can see all that for free if you want a book that contains all the new information. It's in audio, which I read myself, Kindle and print, and all of that is at Sibrel.com.
Thank you so much. You got up real early in the middle of the night over there for me, Bart, and I'm so glad. And I'm going to stay in touch as your friend and egg you on, and invite you back when there's timely and breaking. And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And this is TNT Radio.